So you have a great idea for a script and you want to start writing it, but you don't know how to make it phenomenal. Today I'm going to show you some tips on how to do that. What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rob Federick and I am a writer-director with over 22 years of experience in the professional world of filmmaking, visual effects, and production. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about screenwriting and how to improve your odds of writing a screenplay that will attract attention and maybe even win some awards. And this is an area I have a lot of expertise in because I've pretty much written every narrative project I've directed, as well as some of the music videos that I've directed with major labels that have garnered billions of views on YouTube. And to further prove to you guys that I know what I'm talking about, I have two projects that are currently in the film festival circuit. One of them is a short film and the other one's a screenplay. The short film, The Seance, is actually won Best Screenplay at a couple festivals. And my screenplay, Hemophobia, has actually placed finalists in a number of top-tier film festivals and screenplay competitions, and sits at the top 7% of all projects on Coverfly, which is a website that is associated with a lot of screenplay competitions. So that should give you a little bit of context to illustrate that the advice you're gonna get today is actually hands-on practical, and I'm not just giving you fluff, because my goal with this channel has always been to give you advice that I've done myself that has proven successful so that you guys can take what you learn and apply it and then succeed in your own projects. So in this video, we're gonna cover a number of tips that are going to help increase your odds of getting your screenplay noticed, but also increase the odds of making your story come through more powerfully. So I'm gonna tailor this whole video based on my current experience writing Hemophobia. Now, Hemophobia is a short screenplay, but I want to make sure that you know that all of this advice also applies to features, which I have also applied in the same sense and have seen the same results. But I wanted to tailor it against my most recent project because I wanted you guys to make sure that you guys were getting the most up-to-date information of what the experience is like to getting your script out there. So tip number one, the first thing that you need to do is get your idea down on paper, right? So if you have a loose concept, a character, a setting, a concept that you want to just put down on paper, start jotting down all the notes that you can and start writing it all down. I personally keep a creative notebook that I write all my ideas in. I jot down, I just kind of do the brain dump so that I can sort of download the concept and I have it there for future reference. But you want to focus on these sort of three topics. You want to make sure that you nail down what genre your film is about, at least that you have some sort of main character and some degree of a concept or plot that is going to make the movie interesting. So an example of this relating to my project Hemophobia, I wanted to create a horror short that was simple to execute but had an interesting concept that would catch the viewer's attention. And that was, what if someone started bleeding uncontrollably without knowing how or why, and it wasn't stopping? And that's the premise that really haunted and captured me, that made me want to tell this story. And those were the notes that I first started writing down on my notebook. So the more information that you have, the more that you can write on paper. It doesn't matter if it's unorganized, you just want to get it down first and download it, because that's going to help you sort of get the ideas on paper that you're going to reference later, and then you're going to be able to sort of incorporate some of those ideas to then flesh out your script. Now that you have a genre, a concept, and you have sort of an idea where you want to go with the script, the best thing that you could do is actually start to watch movies or read scripts in the genre that your movie is about. And if you have any concept that resembles other movies, definitely watch those or read those scripts. While you might think, well, I don't want to rip off those movies, and I'm certainly not telling you to do that, you're going to learn what these filmmakers did right and wrong. Remember, inspiration doesn't just hit from anywhere. It actually comes from everything that you've experienced creatively. And so you want to make sure that you absorb several scripts and several movies that are then going to spark your imagination, that are going to help you write your script. Now, remember, script writing is one of the most difficult things to do, and the more inspiration and the more references that you can pull from, the better that your screenplay is going to be, and the easier it's going to be to write it. Tarantino does this effectively well. He looks at a ton of movies and pulls from tons of inspiration and then sort of concocts his own versions of the things that inspired him to make his movies extremely unique. So once you've written down your notes and you've done your research, the next thing to do is to set your plot lines down. You want to make sure that you're going to have at least a main character with a goal that is going to have obstacles that are going to prevent him or her from achieving that goal. And then think about ways creatively that your character, using their sort of intellect, would get around these obstacles. And you're gonna want to do a 3-act structure, which is going to help you sort of flesh out what your beginning, middle, and end of the story is going to look like. You can do this by writing out beats, which means you just need to write one sentence or two, just put down the main key events that'll happen. You'll focus on the details later while you're writing the script. The other thing that you want to do is understanding a concept from the book Save the Cat, which I highly recommend all screenwriters to read. And you can always watch this video where I talk about 3 books that can help improve your filmmaking skills. I talk a little bit about Save the Cat in there and some of the concepts in that book, but I highly encourage you guys to read it on your own because it's a very valuable book for screenwriters. One of the concepts that Save the Cat talks about is knowing what your story is about and making sure that you flesh out a log line. A log line is essentially a 1 to 2 sentence synopsis that talks about what your story is about. And that is what you really have to define. And a good log line, it really indicates to someone who has not read your script everything they need to know about the script itself. In the case of my script, Hemophobia, the log line is a hemophobiac's worst nightmare becomes her dreaded reality after she starts bleeding uncontrollably after a routine blood test. That log line creates intrigue and it sets up the plot for what is about to happen. It is a woman that is fearful of blood and she is experiencing exactly what she's fearing and she has to figure out a way to save herself. So again, a character with a goal and an obstacle that's getting in the way. Now, if you're writing a short film like I did with Hemophobia, the thing with short films specifically is that they're actually a lot harder to pull off than feature films. They both have their challenges in their own right, but the thing with short films is that you have to get people to care within a very short period and invest in the narrative without much context. It's best to focus on one major setup with one major payoff. Now, if you understand the concept of setups and payoffs, that is something that you're going to need to illustrate within any narrative project that you are writing as a screenplay. You always want to have setups and payoffs, something that you set up that people in the audience are aware of, and then it takes time to pay off in a creative way that is satisfying and fulfilling for the audience to watch or read. So with my screenplay Hemophobia, I actually focused on the narrative developing between 8 to 12 pages. And I didn't want it to be longer than that because I was aiming to actually shoot this short film as a concept that I wanted to put into film festivals. And so I focused on the premise of one major setup and one major payoff. And when I did the research that I did in watching a ton of short films, I really saw that the most successful short films adopted this premise. And in the case of my script, the setup that I had was that it's a woman who is deathly afraid of blood, getting her blood drawn in a routine blood test. And while she's going to get the needle inserted into her, she actually looks away because she's afraid of watching the blood come out of her arm. And when she gets home, she starts to bleed from all parts of her body uncontrollably, and she doesn't know where the blood is coming from. That is the major setup that I put into my screenplay. As the screenplay develops, we find out that the major payoff is that the doctor that she went to go see actually injected her with a serum that causes her to bleed from her pores when she looked away, because the doctor knew she was afraid of it and was able to sneak in the serum that would cause her then to bleed. Now, if you're writing a feature film, this premise can apply the same. You want to have one sort of major setup and one sort of major payoff. And to give you a clear example of that, let's talk Star Wars. So A New Hope is centered around Luke Skywalker, who is living on a planet that is sort of desolate and barren, and he dreams of being a space fighter and going out into space and exploring the galaxy. Everything from that setup leads Luke on his journey to then eventually becoming a fighter pilot that goes on to destroy the Death Star. If you can focus on a major setup with a major payoff, you've already gone far ahead in the battle of writing your screenplay. Now, this next tip might seem obvious to some, but it is something that a lot of filmmakers sometimes overlook, and that is to keep the narrative interesting. Keep moving and get to the point. There's nothing worse than a slow burn of a film if it's not interesting. The best way to do that is to tell the story narratively by showing and not telling. You want to make sure that instead of giving a bunch of details about the world and everything else that surrounds it, show it through action. My main character is deathly afraid of blood, and the way that I show that is that we start the screenplay right as she's about to get a needle inserted into her arm to get her blood drawn. You can tell that as the needle goes in, she's freaked out, she's not having a good time, and that visibly shows through action that clearly she doesn't like the sight of blood. that when later on we see her start to actually bleed, she starts to completely freak out and more things happen that add to the tension that feels viscerally relatable to the audience. So again, you want to make sure that you're showing and not telling, and making sure that you're driving the action forward through the character's actions. Remember, you don't have to tell me all the details of the world and everything like that. Just let me experience it through the character's eyes and let me see what they're going to do when they're faced with the challenge of whatever it is that they are facing. To add to this, you also want to create interesting circumstances and characters to populate your screenplay. Remember, the most interesting characters aren't the perfect ones. It's actually quite the opposite. The more flawed your character, the more interesting the character will be. Because if your character has circumstances that limit them from actually attaining their goal, the more rewarding it's going to be when the character figures out to play to what actual strengths they have that unconventionally solve those obstacles and challenges. Which brings me into the next point. Be brutal to your main characters. Put them through suffering. A lot of times writers feel like they are their characters and relate to them, and they don't want to necessarily put them through hardship or give them flaws. And the reality is, that's not going to drive a good screenplay. The more flawed, the more damage, the more hurt, the more suffering you put your character through, the more interesting the screenplay is going to be. You want to put them through a difficult situation. In the case of hemophobia, I took the worst fear that this woman, Emily, could have, which is fear of blood, and ramped it up to 1,000, where I just caused her to bleed from everywhere while she was in the safest place she could ever think of, home. And that concept made the narrative so interesting because she needs to figure out A, how to survive this, but B, she has to deal with the worst fear imaginable and she has no choice in the matter. And that is what you guys should be doing with your characters. Putting them through the hardest journey, whether it's their choice or not, but giving them a reason that they can't really just get out of it. They have to solve their journey creatively. Now, a quick tip that I can give you to make your screenplays even more interesting, and this is just an interesting little hack that I use that just gives your screenplay a little bit more flavor, and that is use creative character names. Now, in the case of hemophobia, I have a doctor named Dr. Doolb, and Doolb just sounded sort of like a dorky name because I wanted the doctor at first to feel less intimidating and almost like a dork that you would just pass by. Doolb is the word blood flipped backwards. While that might seem a little cheesy, it's actually highly effective. Blood sort of plays a character in the script. I liked the idea of giving Dr. Doolb a name that sounded kind of dorky, but at the same time reflected the themes of the story. Give your characters interesting names that somehow tie into the narrative. A great example of this is one of my favorite film noirs. It's named Laura, directed by Otto Preminger, and it's considered one of the greatest film noirs of all time. And one of the main character's last names is Lydecker. At first, this character is dismissed as an ordinary character that is just sort of helping the detective solve this case, but in the end you find out that he was guilty of murder. And the idea that his last name was Lydecker sort of subconsciously plants in the viewer's mind that this character shouldn't really be trusted. Now guys, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I offer a course on visual effects and learning how to learn those skills. I'm actually going to be adding a screenwriting course to this website, and I've linked it below. Now, as of the recording of this video, the course has not gone live yet, but it will in a couple of weeks. You can easily sign up for email updates, and I will update you guys once the course has gone live. But to continue to add free value to you guys, let's end up with the last tip, which is rewrite, rewrite, and rewrite. Guys, I cannot stress enough, your screenplay is never going to be a one and done, first draft, you're done, great, here, go send it off to the world. No. If anything, what you want to make sure that you're doing is rewriting your script often. You want to go through at least 5 or 6 drafts before you actually start to send it out to any competitions. Now, that's not to say that you can't send out some first drafts to get some first-handed opinions. That is extremely valuable. You should go out there and have other people that you trust read it that are going to give you honest feedback. Don't send it to people that are just going to say, oh, this is great. Have them actually give you constructive feedback onto what's working and what's not working in your drafts so that then you can go back and rewrite the draft based on the notes that you feel are most appropriate to your screenplay. Now, the best way to do this is to send it out to a bunch of people, get the feedback from all of them, and see what patterns come up. Because if there are any sort of common notions that are coming up from various readers, you know that that's something that you need to fix. Because in the end, writing is subjective, and you don't need to take every piece of criticism or every piece of praise as gospel. You can make sure that you make your own mind up on what you think best serves your story, but if you do notice a pattern of something that keeps coming up, more than likely that is something that you're going to need to tweak on your screenplay. Rewriting is going to help you refine and comb through your script. And also, you don't want to always rewrite and then just go right back to rewriting it. Step away from the project, let your mind refresh, and then read your script a couple of days later. And I guarantee you that as you're reading it, you're going to find flaws in your script or things that you're going to want to tweak. A caveat to that is that you can overwrite a script. So you need to also understand when you feel that the script is at a good point, maybe that's the point where you start to submit it to competitions or get it out there for people to read that might have an interest in buying it. Because the reality is that you can always tweak a project over and over, and you can rewrite yourself into an awful script rather than a great one. So you have to know how to calibrate that, and that is a tricky science to understand. The best way that I could say to navigate is that 5 or 6 drafts is a good amount of drafts. Make sure that you're at least applying some constructive feedback with the 2nd draft, the 4th draft, and the 6th draft. That way you can sort of measure the 3 points in time of where your narrative was going and see whether or not you fell off the mark or if you hit the nail on the head. If you feel like it's declining, you can always go back to a previous draft that had better notes and then see how you can build it from there and refine it further. And I hope that that's enough, guys. Obviously, I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but we don't have a ton of time on this video, and I wanted to give you some key information that's helped me with my screenwriting career and helped me get my narrative projects out there. You can also stay tuned for an upcoming video, which is how to win film festivals. That video has a lot of great information on how to actually execute your short films and get them out into the festival circuit, and you can apply some of that same knowledge to screenplay competitions or screenplay film festivals. Hopefully, this video brought you a lot of value. I hope that you can drop a like and subscribe. Again, it helps the channel, it helps me to keep making these videos for you guys, and let me know what else you guys want to learn about in the comments below. So with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned some skills that will help you forge your creative future, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.